A short introduction perhaps would be in order of the two of us. I've been working, or we have been working with negotiating IT agreements for a long time. Personally, I've done this for, close to 20 years. And we will go through a number of the theoretical aspects and a number of practical examples on how to approach negotiation of IT contracts.
Yeah, I've only been doing this for 5.5 years, so compared to you, it's not a lot. But yes, we've been through this with multiple vendors, different sizes, different client sizes. But this pretty much goes for everyone.
And then let's start. First of all, a little literature, a set of good advices on where to read more about this. Here at Zangenberg, we are very committed to what's known as the Howard School of Negotiation. So the two, you would say, the main Bible there is the book Getting to Yes, and we believe that anybody who's engaging in any kind of negotiation should be reading that book. And the accompanying Getting Past No, that basically handles the issue of managing difficult people and difficult situations. It's a very good. Those are the two main basic books. In the more colorful side, The Kremlin School of Negotiation is a book I came across a few years ago. It is the negotiation book with all the techniques used by the Russians or the Soviets during the Cold War. The funny thing is, of course, that Getting to Yes is written by Americans, also written during the Cold War. So what you get here is basically the opposite sides approach to negotiation, which, funny enough, is actually pretty similar. There's a lot of similarities. There's also a lot of quite funny differences. The Kremlin School of Negotiation that's been taken up to today also emphasis a lot on how to negotiate with corrupt civil servants. So there's a lot of examples there's a few examples on that. The last book we've put on here is Trump, The Art of the Deal. We put a big fat red bar across it. We don't believe, read the book. It's in its own way, it's a funny book. It tells you a lot about what you should not do. The Trump book is negotiation is about winning. There's a winner and a loser. And we basically believe, like the Howard School of Negotiation, that is a unproductive way of approaching negotiation. Negotiation is not about winning. It's also about it's about getting what you want, but it's also about making the pie bigger, making sure that everybody leaves the table with some sense of achievement. And negotiation is joint problem solving, not about bullying the other part. We've written a book ourselves. It's in Danish, so for those of you who want to delve into the details of negotiating IT agreements, this is a book on that.
Can you put it through ChatGPT and then?
We're working on that. Okay, yeah, and then once that's done, everybody can ask ChatGPT anything about negotiating IT agreement. They will get the correct answer, but without quoting me.
Oh yeah.
So they will just get the right answer. Yeah. Okay. So we'll start out with some of the general negotiation experiences that we've made over the years. Should we take one each?
Yeah, sure.
Will you start?
Yes. So a phrase that you almost always hear is best and final. And it's for the most of you that have experience within this knows that best and final is not best and final, or it's not best and it's not final. We've seen files called best and final version 5 and 6. It's very common that we have to push through a couple of best and finals.
Which basically means that don't accept
exactly.
the first best and final.
Often they could start out saying this is best and final.
The second experience we have is that when organizations start working with negotiation as a discipline, they don't only, they do get better deals, but they also get better relationships with the people they're negotiating with. We've helped organization here at Zangenberg, we've helped organizations negotiate IT agreements since 2008. So we've seen a lot of negotiations. We've been part of a lot of negotiations. And this is a very important learning, is that those organizations that starts professionalizing their negotiation approaches and the negotiation skills among their negotiators, among their project managers, sourcing, responsible procurement people, whatever. Those organizations, they kind of educate their vendors in negotiating in a more productive way. So they do get better relationships.
And the third one, don't negotiate the other party below their pain points. It's basically that you have an ongoing relationship, and if you are below anyone's pain point, they will get that loss back in some way or another. There's no need for you to agree on something that you cannot agree on. If you don't have a zone of possible agreement that overlaps, then it's better to depart without an agreement than it is to force someone into a place that they cannot stay in.
And this is a point where having some data is quite useful, because where is that pain point? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily when they start to say ouch that you've actually reached the real pain point. So it's more about knowing where do they actually start losing money, or where does the risk becomes unbearable to them. Mm-hmm. And this is where you have good use of outside data points. Okay, the fourth one here is make the pie bigger. Then there's more to share, which is about a very basic negotiation element of putting in what we call options into the negotiation. Instead of narrowing the negotiation space down, try and put more elements into the negotiation so there will be more value to both parties. And we'll get back to that.
Yeah, and the last point here is there's other things than just the price in a negotiation. So take your time to discover what's important to the other part, because that's where you actually get the better equilibrium, where you can give out something that's not a lot of value to you, but it has a lot of value for the other part. So to discover those is often the way to get a good deal.
Exactly. Okay, so a lot of these things we talked about before, those are things that are, you would say, general negotiation, good general negotiation advice. So what's special about the IT negotiation? And we believe there are at least 6 things that make IT negotiations special and that you need to take into account when you plan and execute your IT negotiation. The first one is, in the world of IT, the big customers does not necessarily get the biggest discounts. They will meet the best negotiators. And we've got data to support this claim. And we'll get back to that a little later. But basically, that is, it's important to know that just being a big Danish company doesn't mean that you'll get the big discounts.
Yeah, and the IT market is not a transparent market at all. So this is a market that doesn't have the same the same effects as other markets would have in just coming from the economics school book. Here you have a market where the customer does not know what the prices should be or the price of the alternatives are. It's not just normal commodities where you can go into 2 or 3 shops and look up what's the cheapest one.
For some of the IT operational services, there's been a constant and significant decrease in unit prices, as we say here. It means that you are in a market where prices go down all the time, which is quite special because that's not the case for many other markets. So you need to take that into account when you negotiate.
And the Wagner opera, it basically, this is saying that your vendor will probably prolong your negotiation much more than you would like to, and that's a typical tactic because that's a part of getting getting you to bend in, because you'll be the impatient at one point, and that's just another way to get a better deal for them. But expect it, we've seen it over and over again.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
is a common tactic, just to prolong without any substance in it.
They have enough resources, they have enough people to actually do that. So it is a tactic we've seen used many times. And the Stockholm Syndrome is a term we use to describe that many of our clients find themselves in a situation where they kind of give up before starting negotiating because they believe they are in a monopoly situation where they have no negotiation leverage whatsoever. But that's not true. You do have negotiation leverage even when you are negotiating with Microsoft or Oracle or SAP over products that you can't replace. At least you can't replace them in the foreseeable future. Even in those situations, you do have a lot of negotiation leverage.
And finally, there's other things that might be even more important in the contract than the price. The contract terms, an example could be the flexibility of your contract. What kind of swap rights do you have? Because that might be the way to save even more money than you can on the price itself. And there's other terms as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of terms. I mean, in IT development contracts, it could be your right to basically require that resources are replaced during the project, or contract terms regulating the penalties if for late delivery and so on. So there might be a lot of contract terms that actually will be more important to you than the raw price when a project is running. Okay, so one of the things that we believe is important to say right now is that you'll have a lot of contracts in your organization. You will have a number of sourcing agreements, and the question we've been asked many times is it possible to negotiate these contracts at any other time than when they actually end? And what we've found is that you can basically go in and start renegotiating your sourcing agreements basically anytime. Probably not 2 weeks after you sign the contract, but definitely a few years after you signed a contract, you can start considering going in and try to renegotiate either price or terms and conditions in the contract. There's always the opportunity to do this with the vendor, and many vendors are actually willing to discuss changes, basically because vendors have a vested interest in keeping you happy so that you will extend the contract at contract end. So to understand that in this case, it's important to see this as the vendor will see it, like it is in any negotiation. It's important to try to see this as the opposite part will look at the situation. And the vendors are typically interested in making sure that you are not perhaps overly joyous, happy, but at least so satisfied that you won't consider exchanging them with another vendor or putting this out for an RFP at the end of the contract term. Obviously, for public sector clients, this means that you will have to put this out for an RFP and a public tender at the end of the contract period. But throughout the period, we've seen many public sector entities actually enter into to changes in the contract. Yes, we know there are compliance stuff. You need to make sure that you are within the legal boundaries of what you can and can do. But we've seen a lot of negotiations midterm in also in public sector contracts, or often using the change clauses in the contract as the overall vehicle to make that happen.
Yeah, again, looking at it from the account manager's perspective, from your vendor, this does make sense, because his next big win will be the renewal of your contract. The current contract is already closed. He doesn't have any interest in that anymore. So his next interest will be the renewal.
Okay, so we'll now take you through some of the basics of the negotiations strategy and the theory of negotiation. Those of you who've seen us talk about negotiation before, you might go out for a cup of coffee. There will be new stuff later on. But for those of you who've seen this, take a break. But
repetition is
repetition is always good. Yeah, of course. Okay, so to have an effective negotiation, you would have to basically take these three things into consideration. You need to prepare for negotiation.
And that's not just the week going up to. That, depending on the contract, this could be a year in advance that you start collecting data or interest from your different organization, business units. So you get the picture of what your goal is for the coming negotiation.
We usually say that for software negotiations, those are the longest Wagner operas. The software negotiations can drag on forever, and what we usually advise there is start a year in advance by starting your preparation of making sure you understand your baseline, you understand your prognosis, and prepare for a negotiation that will go on for at least half of that year. Then secondly, you need a strategy and you need a plan. And we'll take you through the main points of a negotiation strategy in an IT negotiation shortly. But you need to put a strategy in place. And then you need well-defined roles on your side of the table. Even for a small negotiation, you need to define who play which role. And we could go a little into the details of the different roles. I don't think we'll use a lot of time today on that, but just make sure that you know who's actually the negotiation leader, who is the project manager of the negotiation team. If there's a team of doing this, it might be the same, but it's not necessarily the same. Who is taking notes? Who's the expert in which area, and where do you escalate to? So who has what escalations points do you have? The thing we want to get away from is what we call haggling. Haggling is what takes place in the bazaar, where you basically start in an unreasonable place, both of you. So what the seller says 500 for the Chinese vase, and the buyer will give 100, and then you meet at 300. Or whoever is most stubborn, you will meet closest to that person.
Yeah, and this just basically if this is the only backdrop you have for negotiating, the starting point will give you the outcome. So both parts have incentives to be extremely unrealistic in each of their bid, and then getting to the middle can take a lot of time, right?
Yeah. And basically what we're saying is the haggling is the tactic for people who do not bother about preparing, right? Haggling is what everybody can do without having any preparation, but it is not a good idea. It's not necessarily the fair solution to meet in the middle. You might even leave a lot of value on the table. It's actually quite ineffective. You reward the unrealistic starting point, you can hurt the relationship, and when there are more than two parties involved, it doesn't really work that well. Yeah. So basically what we're saying is we need to take a step back. Take us through this one.
Yeah, well, this is probably just like a theory behind it, but where you have at the two parts, and they have a span of a range of agreements where they would be happy to let's say sell the vase. So the seller has a certain price that he would like to get, and he does have a minimum price that he wouldn't want to sell it for less than. The other way around, the buyer has the opposite, something that he would a maximum that he would be paying for the product, and he has something that he would a really low price that he would be really happy about getting. And those ranges, if they overlap, then you have the zone of possible agreement. And if they don't overlap, you don't really have anywhere to meet. But yes, often in negotiations, because at least if you're realistic, then you would have some zone of possible agreement. But that's not just one point. The idea about this is that the zone of possible agreement is also a range. So depending on how much you overlap, the bigger the zone is. And meeting at then you want to meet at the end closest to your desired price.
And the interesting thing here is, of course, that, when we start a negotiation, this is the assumption. The assumption is that this is what the world looks like. Mm. There is a zone of possible agreement, because if there weren't, we wouldn't be negotiating, right? So both parties go into the room with the assumption that this is what the world looks like. The problem is, of course, that they will both start with something that is very far outside the ZOPA. Because the seller will start with the seller's desired price, and the buyer will start with the buyer's desired price. And those are both far away. And no one wants to disclose their walk away. I mean, the how far they are willing to go. So we need to find ways to get into the ZOPA, typically. So when you go into the clothes store, the price tag on the suit, that's the seller's desired price. Mm-hmm. Remember that. But there is a walkaway for every clothes store everywhere. Something that you can get them down to, right? And the problem is, the question is, can you get them down there? And what's the tactics? Because in many situations, when you go to the table and you start discussing prices, you get the sense that this is what the world looks like.
Yeah, that you don't have anywhere to meet.
Yeah.
That the price is too high for the buyer, and your desired price is too low for the seller.
And this could be the case. It could be the case that the seller, the account manager, actually goes to the table with a mandate that is higher than your walk away. It could be the case. So it's not just something they say. It was not the case when they met the first time. This was actually the case when you meet with the account manager the first time. So now the question is, how do you make these ranges move, right? And basically, to make things move, we need to understand some of the negotiation basics. One, the difference between positions and interests. So And this is good in every aspect of life. Every aspect, Henrik? Every aspect. Every aspect of life is that what people say is not necessarily the best reflection of their real interests. So when when people say something like, we need a penalty clause, or we need this penalty clause, and the opposite side says, we cannot accept that penalty clause. Those are positions. Behind those, there are some interest, what they really want to achieve, because the penalty clause in itself is not important to the client. It's important that the vendor delivers on time, or that they have the incentive to deliver on time, and so on. Yeah. We've written a long article in Danish on that, specifically on penalty clauses, and why the interest behind the penalty clause is not necessarily met by the penalty clause itself. Why that position is not necessarily the best coding of the interest. You could do other things. For example, you could put other things in place to make it more likely that or give incentive to that the vendor will deliver on time. So there's a number of things you can do in order to meet the interests. So that's why when you are talking about negotiations, don't focus on the positions, focus on the interests. Start trying to understand the opposite side and their interests. And to help you do that, we've written down in our book, we've written down the typical interests for the vendors in different situations, because IT vendors are quite similar, obviously, so they have a lot of the same interests. Once you understand that vendors have a vested interest in getting continuous business from you, and that the fact that it's actually quite expensive to acquire new customers compared to maintaining the existing ones. Once you understand that, that is extremely useful in negotiations, because whatever you can do to basically support that interest, you should be able to exchange for good prices, good terms and conditions. Yeah, very good. The vendors have an interest in making sure that they do not lose money. I mean, they have an interest in reducing risk, which is one of the things you'll see in many negotiations where you don't understand what is really the problem here. Why can't we get them to agree on, for example, a specific timetable or specific resources or other things? Then it might be that they see a risk that they can't actually deliver that there's a risk that they won't be able to deliver on time or with the required resources and so on. And risk is capitalized by vendors. Risk is money as well. So understanding how they calculate risk is also extremely important in these.
And the human aspect as well. I mean, there's personal interest beyond or on top of the organizational interest, right? Like bonus schemes for the account managers, or just whatever personal situation they're in, meaning that maybe they really want to close this deal before Christmas, or more than you do, or whatever. But yeah, separating that is another game.
So in the good negotiations, we understand the opposite part's interest. They understand our interest, right? We understand each other, which allows us to find good solutions, basically put more things into the negotiations. Okay, so us being a reference case to you would be important. That would be nice for you, dear vendor, that we would stand up on a symposium somewhere and talk about this project we are doing together. Okay, this is of no cost to me. I can do that, but in exchange, I would like a better price. So those kind of putting things into the negotiations is what really helped us get to the best possible deal.
But yeah, the dilemma is you don't want to disclose too much, as then they will then the zone of possible agreement will be more clear for the other part than it is to you. So the more information you give, the better cards the other part has in their hand. But again, so this is a balance.
Yeah, and this is basically what's called the negotiator's dilemma in the theory books. That whenever you tell the other part something about your interest, you basically run the risk of worsening your own negotiation position. And the solution to that is to be open about the nature of your interest, but not necessarily the intensity. So the important thing here is to understand you need to tell the vendor what's important to you, but you also need to require some reciprocity in the discussion. They need to basically acknowledge what is important to them. And basically preparing for that and trying to get some intelligence as to what could be their interest is typically a good idea. And then you need to get into the framework of what we call joint problem solving. So, in short, there are 4 central elements to any negotiation. If you ask the people at Howard, they would say that a negotiation is made up of people, interests, options, and criteria. The people, it's important whenever you negotiate that you separate the problem you're negotiating from the problem with the people you're negotiating with, which is also and often a set of problem of its own. We won't get into that today. We have a 2-day course, negotiation course, and on that you will be able to train the people side of it by negotiating with very difficult people. But that's another story. Then the interest, as we talked about before, yours and theirs, understanding what's our interest, what's their interest, and then the options.
Making the pie bigger in some sense. Which ways could we go with this contract? Could we extend for another couple of years? Could we include another business unit? Could we separate 2 business units from each other? There's a lot of theoretical options, but which apply to this negotiation needs to be clarified.
For example, you're negotiating with a software vendor. They have a piece of software and it's priced at a different point. You believe it's too expensive. You know that others have acquired this piece of software for a lower price. You're using this software today. One option is, of course, I get it cheaper. But that if that doesn't fly, other options would be, what about a differentiated pricing of this piece of software? Why don't we have a white-collar price and a blue-collar price? Why don't we have a price for this group of users that uses the software a lot less than these people? And believe it or not, that is actually one of the most widely used negotiation levers right now with both SAP and Microsoft. That is actually the discussions around different variants of main products in order to accommodate different user types. Though that's not a part of the basic construct in the software pricing scheme. So options and going on treasure hunt for new options in every negotiation is really what we've seen solve the main problem of getting into a workable ZOPA. The last one, criteria.
You wanna insist on at least agreeing from the start of how are you gonna evaluate these options. What that could be a benchmark, or I mean, it's just that you have the rules of engagement in some sense. So it's not just your subjective argument against their. Getting something objective here is a way to make sure that when you agree, you can see that you agree.
Yeah, the criteria part of the negotiation is really to say that you need to agree on how you decide whether something is reasonable. So what does reasonable mean in this context? And often we suggest that at the beginning of the negotiation, you have a negotiation about the negotiation where you actually discuss this. Like when you're buying a house, the first thing you could start to discuss is what is really the average square meter price for a house in this area? Can we agree on that? Can we agree that there is a square meter price, an average square meter price? And can we agree how that should be applied here? And the seller will say, oh yeah, but hey, look, you got sea view. So that actually, that's worth something extra. And we say, okay, we agree that sea view is something worth something extra. And then we say, but we have the railway in the backyard. That drags it down. Okay, that drags it down. Then we start discussing how much does sea view and railway in the back in the backyard. What does that actually mean? Can we get some outside data to support that the sea view is worth an extra 3 million and the railway drags it down by 2, or what? Yeah. I guess there will be some houses that actually does have that, right? I've never thought of it before.
Of course.
A railway in the backyard and sea view in front. And interesting to see how that works. But basically, criteria is that you agree on how that should be factored in to the negotiation before you actually start negotiating. You will also have these discussions as you move along. And we'll get back to the data part later, where you need to agree on what data will actually can actually be used as an argument in this negotiation. Okay, the people, you need to understand you negotiate with people and then with organizations. So this is kind of the hurdle you need to overcome. Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes you have, impossible people to negotiate with. And sometimes you need to have them replaced or whatever. But you need to basically handle the people problem head on. Otherwise, you won't be able to negotiate. Reading Trump, The Art of the Deal, is a good way of actually understanding the minds of people who do the bully negotiation tactics. So that's why you should read it, because then you'll recognize the negotiation style. Read then Getting Past No to get the tricks on how to overcome it. The interests. How do you get to understand their interest? Well, try and prepare in advance. A lot of the interests that vendors have are generic to the kind of negotiation you are going to start. So a lot of that you can actually understand by preparing. But otherwise, ask questions as you go along. Options. Yeah. I know the example here doesn't really make much sense unless you've been on our course, because there's a negotiation there where a theater is negotiating with a musical diva. But the options is whether you put in a performance bonus for the diva, but you can always put a performance bonus in for the company doing your cloud management services and your FinOps services. So, I mean, a bonus instead of a penalty is like the options you could put in. And getting and finding options throughout the negotiation is what we advise that you spend some time actually doing. So, what have others done? And call your network, for example. Call us, call others that knows about these kind of negotiations.
Yeah, but also, I mean, you might as well be creative here. Come up with some creative new options through brainstorming, and perhaps if they make sense, I mean, then the vendor can tell you why it's not an option if it's not. Also, that will give you more information about their interests.
So, for example, if we look at the application maintenance contracts, the obvious options to discuss is how should this be? What is the basic pricing mechanism? I mean, is this a fixed price? Is this a price based on time and material, or should this basically be a contract based on the number of incidents? Those are main options that you can put into the negotiation and say, okay, I'd like a fixed price contract at a reasonable price. You get an unreasonable price. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then you say, okay, no, then I'd rather discuss a time and material kind of arrangement, but I'd like it to be in a way where I'm sure that you won't overcharge me in terms of hours. Then you start discussing the different options of making that work and what the hourly rate should be, and should there be a minimum fee to ensure that they have people ready and so on. So those are the kind of options you can put into the contract. In the software agreement, we just mentioned, try to do some profiling of your users and suggest that we could have different prices for different user groups. It could also be the way that you phase in the use of new products. Mm. It could be how the discount is calculated. It could be that the discount is a function of your total spend, including cloud products or excluding cloud products, and the cloud products has their own kind of discount structure.
Yeah, or implementation pace. How much have you implemented of their software at a given point in time?
You could have a phase-in of a discount that ended in a higher price, which is not necessarily in your interest, or with the lowest price at the end. There's a lot of options we can put into the negotiation, and try to do that, and also be creative in, are there options that would be of interest to the other party? For example, in a software agreement, it's often the case that vendors will have new products that they are very interested in pushing to their existing client base in order to make them, one, dependent on the products in the future, but also to demonstrate to the market that they're gaining market share. So, and these are often products where there will be substitute products in the market. So they will have a huge interest. For example, Microsoft right now have a huge interest in selling you security products. And in those situations, by actually, you will be able to get huge discounts on those products. Perhaps even get them for free for the first year or two. Now, by actually accepting and using those products, you are actually giving them a gift. You are actually providing value to them. And therefore, that should be exchanged for other benefits in your favor. So the quest is also looking for things you can do that is of little or no cost to you, being part of their next customer seminar or whatever, but have a huge value to the other party. So going into those kind of quest for options, like a joint treasure hunt, and use brainstorming and facilitation techniques to actually get to that point. We've been part of a lot of negotiations, and the beautiful point of any negotiation is where the two parties actually start to inspire each other to generate new ideas of things that could go into the negotiation. And you often find that when you get to that situation, when you get to that like magical point in the room where people start working together to put more things in, that is where you actually get beyond the positions and into the real problem solving. So also try and create an informal settings. I've been to negotiation meetings where there were 20 people and a very long table, and the two parties on each side of the table. That is not a very good. I mean, that does not really facilitate joint problem solving, or at least it's not inviting into those kind of problem solving initiatives. So yeah. And then like in any good brainstorming, get crazy, get real. There's a point where we explore, and there's a point where we evaluate. And like any idea is a good idea.
Yeah.
In the first phase. In the second phase, some ideas are not good ideas anymore.
But again, that will also just give you some insight into the other part's interests. They'll probably reveal something about why it's not an option. If it seems viable from your perspective and they don't see that, then they will have to tell you why that's not viable.
Yeah, and the best question in the world is why. I mean, when they say no, then ask why.
Yeah.
Why not? Okay, reasonable. And basically, the criteria can be anything from tradition into standards, into scientific evidence, and then of course, in our cases, as a benchmarking company, we focus a lot on what you could call average or reasonable market pricing. Okay, so once you want to go into a negotiation, this could be a big negotiation, it could be a small negotiation about a smaller change or an extension to a contract. It could be a functionality you need to have implemented in a system, and you need to agree on the price and terms and conditions for that small 100,000 kroner piece of work. In both a big and a small negotiation, it's a good idea to prepare by drafting a negotiation strategy in this template. Because once you have these things under control, then you're basically ready to negotiate. And let's take it very briefly, and then we can get back to some of the details. You need to be sure that you know what the scope is. What are we negotiating? And the scope can expand as we move along, but then we need to agree that the scope expands.
But would you define it with the limit to the scope is here? I mean,
yeah, basically basically what we say is on the inside, on when we prepare for a given scope. So it's a Microsoft EA agreement, and the Azure commitment could be part of the scope, or is part of the scope, or is not part of the scope.
And as soon as the scope changes, you will have to review the whole thing.
Then you have to recalibrate your strategy, because your strategy has a target zone. So you basically did your homework and try to find out where do this is the buyer's range from the ZOPA, right? So we have a target zone, we have a walkaway. We have some walk-away criteria defined in the second column, basically saying these are the things that will make us walk away from the table. Yeah. So if we can't get there, we will walk away. We'll have an example shortly. Then we have our interests. We know what's important to us. And then we have their interests, the account manager's interest, the company's interest.
But the point here is that of course you know your interests somewhat by heart, but get it written down so you agree on these are the interests, what are the priorities within these interests. Getting it down on a piece of paper is a good exercise in actually getting to know the actual interest, because there might be other interests that you're not aware of in your own company.
Yeah, and sometimes you might even have interests yourself that you're not aware of. I mean, but you will be aware of them once someone tells you that or reminds you that, oh yeah, by the way, making sure that we have the product available at all times, also during wartime or whatever, is also an interest that I didn't really think about. So, so our interests, and as you said, there might be different interests around the organization that you need to make sure that you have in focus. So there's the interest of getting the lowest price, but there's also the interest of having access to the newest updates and new developments and innovation and consultants or specialists or whatever.
or minimizing risk in a transition or whatever.
Yeah. Compliance
Yes.
is becoming more and more of an interest. And then their interests, understanding them. And as I said before, for those of you who want to get in deeper into that, and you should all do that whenever you're negotiating, in our book we have examples on that. Even on quarterly analytics, if you are a quarterly analytics subscriber, we do have what we call playbooks for different negotiation types, and you can go in the playbooks and see the typical vendor interests in different situations there. Then we have the BATNA.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that yet. So these are your alternatives to this to this agreement, and it's the best alternative to the negotiated agreement. So basically, this is the alternative that you have if you don't reach an agreement here, and you might need to develop those. You might need to go into a discussion with another competitor. If it's software, you might need to ask your organization, how would this alternative software meet our needs, etc. And you might even want to quote, or you might want to get into actual negotiations with other vendors as well, just to know your BATNA well enough to get a good agreement if this is your focus negotiation.
So the BATNA is what you will do if we do not agree, right? And the BATNA is like the last weapon you will pull and say, okay, now I will actually use another product. Now I will actually start migrating away from your products. Now I will actually put this contract out for an RFP to find an alternative vendor. Now I will not buy this.
Write it in hand instead.
Write it in hand instead. So the BATNA, and in many cases you have more BATNAs than you think. For example, in most software agreements, there are BATNAs because that's back to the Stockholm syndrome we talked about. There's a perceived monopoly situation. You believe that you have no other option than basically to sign the contract that's being put in front of you. But you do have a BATNA. For example, you could not sign the contract, right? You could actually go over the deadline. These BATNAs will have consequences or potential consequences, but you need to play them through. So you basically need to discuss with yourself what are our BATNAs here, and how can they be used in the negotiation?
Yeah, and how will they take care of our interests? In what way will they meet our interests? Because the BATNA needs to be realistic. It needs to be the actual alternative that you will aim for, if not this agreement. And
you can be sure that on the other side of the table they have a pretty clear picture of what they believe are your BATNAs, right? And often they're actually worse than your BATNA really is. So that's why disclosing your BATNA can actually make the other part at ease. Oh, so that's the only thing you're thinking about doing. So you're not thinking about exchanging our product right now. You're actually thinking about doing that over the next 3 years. Yeah. That doesn't really scare me that much. So disclosing the BATNA is something you do at the very end, where you are at a complete stalemate in your negotiation. And then last, we talked about the walkaway criteria. Last is the options. Basically listing the things that we could put into the negotiation to make the pie bigger. We're running a little out of time, so I think I won't go much into the profiling, but you also need to understand who you're negotiating with. And basically that you have people in front of you, Simon in front of you, the account manager, but behind Simon is his boss, Tim, and there's Nick sitting in the basement doing all the calculation, and then there's Monica, the country head of the software company, that doesn't have any direct influence, but has a lot of indirect influence, and therefore can be used. For example, if your boss calls Monica, that might actually have some impact during the negotiation. Okay, so let's dive a little into the data part of this, and why data is important in IT negotiations.
As you said, preparation and getting the options clear is where you need to bring in data. So you actually have realistic and you can prove your arguments.
Yeah. I used to tell my children that if you can't inherit a lot of money, then the only thing that really will help you is good preparation. And they will not inherit a lot of money, so
you make sure of that.
I think a big inheritance is the only thing that beats good preparation, and sheer luck.
Trump is one proof of that.
Okay, let's not go into it. There might be other things that actually, But one of the things that's important to understand here is that there's a number of drivers to pricing in the IT industry, and basically, if you're looking to reduce cost and price is of course of huge importance here. There's a number of things you need to understand. One, in IT operation, prices are decreasing over time, meaning that whenever you are renegotiating a contract, you should expect the price per unit to decrease. That's important because it's important whenever you negotiate, you should expect things to be cheaper than the last time around. But it also means that when you're negotiating a contract far out in the future, make sure that the contract also takes this into account in some way or the other. Then the second one is pricing of software is set completely individual.
Yeah, and if you just look at the graph below, this is you have the contract value. So different contracts are plotted in this graph, and then you have the LSP price on the left, and you can see you don't have this the larger the contract, the lower the price, or the other way around. It's basically a random. A random.
Yeah, we'll get a little detail later on, right? The third thing is whenever you have a maintenance contract on custom development, and a lot of you will have huge contracts on IT maintenance AMS contracts. The main driver of cost is, of course, the number of incidents, the work that needs to be done. And as you reach operational maturity of these systems, of your systems, you will see a decline in effort, and therefore also a decline in cost, and you should see a decline in price. The last thing is that IT capacity in the cloud or on-prem, classical outsourced IT capacity is often underutilized, and therefore right-sizing of infrastructure can be the one thing that really has the biggest impact on the total price you're paying. So even if you agree in the very left side on the right unit price, you might even end up paying too much if the capacity itself is over-provisioned. So putting that into the mix of your discussions and your negotiation, how do we actually ensure that the unit price is right and the capacity is right? The capacity is sized to the actual need. Those are elements that will have a much bigger impact on your final cost of your contract than a lot of other things.
So what we're saying is that not just that you need to know this. These are the things you need data on to you need to know what your capacity is utilized at, or you need to know what the market price for a given contract is. You need to know how much application maintenance activity there is compared to earlier, what trend there is in that. These are the generic your expectations to what the data will show, but it will only turn into arguments as soon as you have your own data proving these points.
So here we've tried to collect some of the data points that you should try to obtain prior to a negotiation, right?
Yes.
So this is what you should be go hunting for as part of your negotiation. So whenever you're negotiating a software, and there could be others, so these are just what we believe are the most important data points in general, right? Yeah. So if you're negotiating a software agreement, the one, as we said before, I think let's just I'll just go to this is one of our favorite graphs, right? It's basically shows the discount levels for the M365E3 as a function of the contract size. And as you can see in this case with this plot, there's obviously, if you go to the far right, you can see that there are actually a client in the middle that gets a lower price than any of the larger clients. And you can also see that even if you take the highest point above the 750 mark, and try and go back, you can see that there are smaller clients with about 50 million in total contract size over 3 years that pays less, right? So this is just to make the point. You need to know what others with similar spend, what they have paid, in order to make a proper software negotiation. Whether you come to us, whether you ask in your network, whether you use the data from the last place you were employed, I don't care. You need to get that data in order to negotiate a software agreement. So the point here, don't negotiate software agreements without having at least a vague idea of the discount level you should be expecting. The second thing is terms and conditions obtained by others.
Yeah, and I mean, this is again asking your network what kind of terms did you reach with your in your contract? What could be an option for us? Oh, I thought 90 days, the payment with what is it called? Where you have to pay 90 days after you deliver the thing. That might be a standard, you think, but then you realize that someone else has a 15 days period of paying, and there's a lot of terms, and there's a lot of ways to go around these terms. I mean, for each term there's probably 10, 15 ways that you can find just by asking around for the same software or the same application maintenance vendor. So again, here you can also just be creative, but it's nice to know what kind of terms and conditions have other peers reached with the same vendor.
And there are really within software there are massive amounts of terms and conditions that we've seen in different contracts that can be achieved, can be obtained. So yeah. Fourth bullet here on the software is the utilization of the products. So you need to know how you're actually using your products, because that is a negotiation lever with a very huge impact in the negotiation. So you need to find out, okay, how many users are using this every day? How many users are using this once a month or once a week? How many users use the full set of functionality? How many users uses only a limited set of the functionality? It doesn't matter whether you can actually buy the product with limited functionality. It doesn't matter if the vendor does not have different profiling options for different kind of users. For you to demonstrate that is the case does have an impact in the negotiation. So you are able to in many cases you will be able to convince the vendor that there need to be a different pricing for different user types.
It's what we call a functional discount, where you're saying we'll pay one price per every employee that we have, but there's only 2% of our employees that uses this product. This product is only used by this and that many. And in that way you can say, well, we only get 40% of the entire value is of your products, so we're not going to pay more than 40% of the price of each license.
The last one is you need to do your homework in terms of alternative scenarios. Are you buying Microsoft security products for the first time or considering to do that in the negotiation? Make sure you understand what the alternatives cost and make sure to demonstrate that you understand it. Mm-hmm. Get a competitive price, so don't take the list price for the alternative products. Get a quotation so you get a competitive price and use that in your negotiation. Use that not only to get the security products at a reasonable price, but understand that by buying the security products from Microsoft, you're actually locking yourself in with that product for a number of years. And in exchange for that, that's actually playing into their interests. By doing that, you need to have a bigger discount on some of your other products. I mean, that is, and make that visible in the negotiation, that we are aware that we're now buying products that will strengthen your login. In exchange, we want a better price on the rest. So that pricing of alternative scenarios, that's the fourth and very important data point that you need in your software negotiation. If there's any slide from this presentation, we think you should take away is actually the one we are at right now, because we believe these are the data points that you really need to be aware of.
Yeah, and once you put a check mark besides each of these, then you're pretty well prepared for each of the four.
IT operation. Well, we've tried to make with quarterly analytics our subscription service at a mere 15,000 euros? No, Danish kroner. God damn it. A year. You'll get market prices. You'll get the unit prices for server operation, for storage operation, those things that really makes up the big proportion of IT operation. I mean, if you're entering into an ITO contract and you haven't checked the unit prices, then you haven't done your job, in my opinion. Because yes, there's a low level of transparency in the IT market, but here there actually is a level of transparency. We just, one of our consultants just shouted out the other day when he found the new record in unreasonable storage pricing. Yeah, this is what makes us tick here at Zangenberg, when we see a contract and the gigabyte price was at, I think, 30 Danish kroner or something like that. Now,
15
Danish kroner, but the market price is below 1. So basically, make sure you understand the market prices. Make sure you understand price for the SLAs. I mean, what does an SLA cost? Make sure you understand the right sizing potential for whatever you are putting into, whatever you're contracting for. And make sure you understand your and their capitalization of risk. We've put that into a series of articles on Quarterly called the expensive terms and conditions, where you can actually see how the vendor capitalizes the different kind of risk areas. But you need to understand that.
Yeah, also because if you don't understand the vendor's perspective on this, you might find them unreasonable when you ask for something that seems like a little thing to you, but it does have a high risk for the vendor, and that's why they'll put a high price on some things that might not even be worth that much value to you, and that's why you want to evaluate these options before you put them on the table.
When we go to application maintenance, Well, basically, three things you need to understand before you go into the negotiation. What is the operational maturity of the application landscape you're looking at? Was this developed 2 years ago? Then it's not operational mature. Was it developed 10 years ago? It should be somewhere on a state where we would call it operational mature. That will have an impact on the expected variance in terms of how how much will the number of incidents and so on vary over time. But it will, first of all, it will have an impact on the total price. And then you need a detailed breakdown of the incidents, the problems, and the service requests. You need to understand what is actually the activity going on.
Yeah.
Once you have that, then it's possible to basically triangulate yourself into sort of the market price for the service, because then it's benchmarkable. Then you can actually benchmark it.
And this is also a great way, if you have the detailed breakdown of your tasks, your application maintenance tasks, then you also have a good detailed information level to give to your alternative vendors, for them to come up with a reasonable offer for you, if you want to just get an alternative in your negotiation. So this, most of all, you can use the incidents and problems to calculate how much are we actually paying you and per hour for doing whatever activity you're doing for us. And that's most of the best argument you can have for lowering the prices. But again, it's also a good way of looking into what would the price be for if we source this some other way.
If we go to the last one, the application development agreement. Application development agreements, I mean, varies a lot in the way they are constructed, and you will have huge application development agreements and very small ones. Of course, some of the data points that are important here is the rate card. I mean, what do you pay per hour for different kinds of resources? Do you have a blended rate? Do you have a nearshore, local, offshore landed, nearshore landed? I mean, all those kind of rates. You need to understand the market price for those, and you need to understand what's on the table. Obviously, there's a benchmark here in terms of what is a reasonable price right now for these different kind of rate cards under different kind of circumstances. And then there's something about seniority and seniority mix. I mean, understanding whether you have senior or junior. Basically, it's about experience and competence levels. These are data points that, I mean, they are not by far enough to have a good negotiation, but these are data points that are important for the negotiation. So you should at least have them under control before you move in. And then there's a big question. We think it's a big question. Can you benchmark this? Yes, you can benchmark everything. Will the vendor accept the benchmark in the negotiation? So could the benchmark be a criteria in the negotiation? And here the question is, or the answer is, for software, no. The vendor will typically not accept that there is a huge difference in pricing. They will not accept to use any kind of objective, independent third-party benchmarking to set the price. This is not the way they operate. And if you insist on doing that, you run the risk that they will basically tell you that if you insist on doing that, you will not get the best price, because we will not share our good prices with the rest of the world. So don't go, definitely go into benchmarking, says the benchmarker. But do not expect the vendor to accept the benchmarking as such as a vehicle to reach an agreement.
So what you're saying is that to get an idea of what the discount is or the market price is out there, but don't tell your vendor how you got that
No.
knowledge. Just use it. There's no there's nothing wrong in saying, yeah, I just spoke with 3 people from my network that got these different prices. Of course, that's different, and they will react to that. It's different when you say, well, we have this benchmarking company here helping us, and they say the market price in Scandinavia is this and that. Then they'll keep their information to themselves because they know someone is listening in.
So software, when you do the negotiation, talk about reasonable market prices, talk about, stuff, what's going on in the market, don't be specific. On the exact opposite side, you'll have the IT operations market. This is a mature market where you'll have a benchmarking clause in many contracts. So actually vendors and clients have agreed for decades, that a benchmark is actually a reasonable way to find.
The old Romans.
They have agreed for that a benchmark by an independent third party is a reasonable way to adjust the price. Also because the prices are decreasing over time. The same is the case for application maintenance. And you also find that rate card benchmarking is actually accepted in most cases in application development. So yes, saying that we will use a third party, an independent third party to basically help us arrive at a reasonable price is an option, but it's not the only way. I mean, you can use benchmarking and getting your data just to set your own target zone and then trying to negotiate yourself into the target zone without even telling the vendor that you have a benchmark, or you can try and agree with the vendor that the benchmark should really be the way we arrive at the right price. Yeah. In the presentation, you'll find some slides that just demonstrates how the prices still decreases even during the last year's crisis. You're still seeing quite significant price decreases on server and storage. You will have this example on how the discount levels does not necessarily reflect the size. And yeah, this is, no, I don't think we'll go into that. Yeah, that's basically the same just for SAP. Yeah. And in some cases, especially when we started doing this in 2009, where we started benchmarking software contract, we saw this smile being more prevalent, that you saw that small clients had big discounts or paid a lot, had low discounts. Small clients paid a high price and the big clients paid a high price, while the biggest discounts, the lowest prices, were actually in the middle. Yeah. So we will leave you with a few notes on preparation and drafting your negotiation strategy. It's important during your preparation that you understand the service that you are negotiating about. It's important that you understand the market and the dynamics. It's important that you understand the pricing mechanisms in the market, and that you understand your counterpart and your own stakeholder landscape, and that you understand what's being put in front of you. And we talked about it before. This is then the negotiation strategy filled out for an Oracle negotiation. We don't have time now to go through that, but we will leave you with that in the presentation, where you can actually see how you can put this down and saying, okay, so what's our interest? It's actually to get market compliant prices, but in this case also to have some specific terms changed and make sure that we have a fixed high discount for future purchases. So in many cases, it's also preparing yourself for the next negotiation, as this is repeating games, as it's called in game theory. You'll have more negotiations with the same vendor over time. So one negotiation also prepares the ground for the subsequent negotiations.
Yeah, and also you'll be in a partnership with them during the entire contract. So there's also that relationship to take care of.
Exactly. Stay tuned for more webcasts from our side. We have. I really look forward to this webcast. I have to say, I'm looking equally, or perhaps a little more.
The coming webcast is very hyped in our offices. We're looking very much forward to this one.
We will have a FinOps, a cloud optimization workshop, and without disclosing too much, I can just say that we've beaten all the tools we've compared ourselves to in trying to optimize cloud spend, and we will go. This will be extremely detailed, and we are not sure that 1.5 hours will be enough to get into the very intricate details on how to optimize your cloud spend. But it will be a tour de force of different cloud optimization options and some of the most beautiful graphs I've ever seen in my life on how you can actually identify optimization levers in your cloud spend. So stay tuned. There will be so much completely fresh and new stuff coming out of Pilestræde the 13th of June. So with that last and very unrelated, I would say, announcement, thank you for your participation during this one. Looking forward to see you soon.
Yeah, hope to see you again.